So how traumatic are breakups?
The breakup is as traumatic as the wound that's unhealed. So the breakup itself is upsetting, and obviously you're going to grieve and go through that, but the trauma is attached to the wound that already exists. I'm a psychotherapist, trauma specialist, have been for about 20 years. Someone always says who they are in the beginning. They show you exactly who they are. Your idea of who you want them to be, so you're idealising them and you're sort of projecting the perfect image onto them because you want to resolve the problem that's within you. You've made me feel like this. You've hurt me. And I always say, someone can only trigger a wound that already exists. So in relationships, in dating, if you're hurt, it is your responsibility as an adult to understand what's hurting and why, and not blame the other person. The reason I became interested in trauma was because I grew up in an abusive household. My dad sexually abused me for several years, went to prison. Before the age of 7, all information goes in unfiltered. So there's no analysis, there's no logic, there's no organisation. Each bit of information that goes in for the child goes in, sits in the brain like a little magnet. As you get older, you're likely to repeat things that you're drawn to that are magnetising with you. As a result of not identifying that they're carrying trauma, they may not speak about it and they may not know that they've got it. It's easier for them to go and drink alcohol or escape through drugs or escape through porn or any of these other addictive behaviours because it helps in the short term, floods the brain with dopamine, but by the time they're 25, their dopamine receptors are so overused and hijacked that now they've got no pleasure. The human race changes as a result of genetic expression and learnt behaviours and societal behaviours and cultural behaviours. Over the next 30 years, we're going to see real problems.
Environment can affect your genetics. That is a proven thing.
Yes. What kids can see on their phones. You know, you can literally see someone being murdered on your phone now, and they're becoming desensitized. They don't know that's traumatic. But for the human experience, it is. Now he can message 30 girls at once that he's never even seen in his life before and ask them out and send nude pictures of himself, and the girls are doing the same back. They're like 12, 13, 14 years old. Honestly, 13 years old giving a boy a blowjob and someone's filming it. These things actually are happening. This is not like, oh, shock value.
It's called happen.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it's happening and it's going to get worse. And then we've got the likes of people like Andrew Tate. I'll be honest, some of what he says makes sense, but the vast majority of it, when you're talking to impressionable, underdeveloped brains, is dangerous. Your unconscious is 95%. So you're only using 5% of conscious awareness at any one time.
What are the first steps to healing from trauma?
The first thing is
welcome back to the number one podcast here in Liverpool. We are joined by a special guest in Ella McCrystal. So Ella, for those people who don't know you, can you just give us a brief introduction on who you are, where you're from and what it is you do?
I'm from Northampton, so a long, long way away. I'm a psychotherapist, trauma specialist, have been for about 20 years. I've also got a multidisciplinary health clinic, so my interest in trauma is beyond the mind. So we're looking at the brain-body system a lot. And really just how people store trauma, how they deal with it, how you can actually get through it. And I kind of look at the metaphysical a little bit as well. So I'm quite interested in coming out of the body and out of the mind and looking at how energy works. So not too woo-woo, but a little bit of pseudoscience thrown in.
A little bit spiritual.
They call it pseudoscience, but really it's just science that haven't been proved yet.
Yeah.
But when you've been doing my job for as long as you have, you'll see things over and over again with people that don't always make sense. So I've got a method called the neuroelectrics method, which is based on lots of science, but there is a little bit of the woo-woo in there as well,
Right.
which I'm sure we'll dive into.
Yeah, we'll peel it back to the beginning. So, like, I think trauma is a word that is thrown around a lot, and you hear it more and more every day. And I think everyone has like a subjective way that they define trauma.
Yeah.
But what actually is trauma?
It's usually, so there's two ways of looking at it. Primarily, when we used to speak about trauma, we used to talk about it as a one-off event. So it would be military, it would be a car accident, it would be something really horrible that happened once. But there's also very complex and chronic traumas as well. So talking about child abuse, neglect, growing up in a household where, you know, it could be that you were in poverty. And that difference, if the person, because it's about personality as well, which we'll come into a bit more, and genetic expression. But if you have a particular type of personality, you might find that growing up in poverty or abuse changes who you are for a really long time, whereas somebody else might find that it doesn't. So essentially it's how it manifests in the person.
Yeah. The way you explained that reminded me of like stress. You have like chronic stress and you have instant stress. So that's what the same sort of thing is, trauma. So what would you say is worse, chronic trauma or stress, like an instant trauma?
It's really difficult to say that, because if you look at even military, I know people that have lost limbs, and this is the interesting bit. So you could have someone that loses both legs or someone that loses one arm, and on paper you might think the one that loses both legs has got it worse. And actually, if you look at the fundamentals around the individual, so what support system do they have? Do they have a family? Did they have a happy childhood? What does it mean moving forward? Are they able to turn this into something, or do they have a limited mindset? So all of those ingredients matter to the actual trauma. So again, when you're looking at chronic trauma, it depends on when the trauma starts. Not always, but often. So if you are born into a family that's abusive or violent or growing up in poverty and neglect, and you're experiencing that from under the age of 7, the chances are you're more likely to have negative maladaptions as a result of that. And that's because the brain's development works in a very specific way. So before we are 7 years old, we don't have any prefrontal fusion. So the prefrontal cortex, the bit at the front, is your executive function. And it really starts to develop around 7 and finishes at 25.
Yeah.
So that means that before the age of 7, I always do this because the brain isn't fused. So we've got a gap at the front of the brain, and all information goes in unfiltered. So there's no analysis, there's no logic, there's no organisation. All the information just goes in. And think of it like magnets. Each bit of information that goes in for the child goes in, sits in the brain like a little magnet. So as you get older, you're likely to repeat things that you're drawn to that are magnetising with you.
Right.
So if you come from an abusive home or you come from a neglectful home, your relationships as you're going through your early teens might mirror because of the magnet effect. And that's just because you haven't got full analysis. So we start to use complex thinking by the age of about 11 or 12, and we're also experiencing ego boundaries there. So we're starting to individualise at that age. As we're going through that sort of bracket, we start to think of the world through our own lens. You mentioned a lens, subjective lens. And we start to be attracted to things that are familiar. So the magnet effect is real. And that's why trauma can be harder to deal with if it's happening before the age of 7. But it also depends on who's around you. And, you know, I think one of the things about sort of childhood trauma in particular is if you've got some good, safe adults around you, it can have an impact on how you deal with that trauma. If the adults around you are all contributing, or there's very few people that are supporting you going through those traumas, societal, you know, teachers, if they're not picking up on things and not supporting the children because the system's broken. You see, now it's even worse. If there's neglect and abuse at home, the systems are really overstretched.
Yeah.
So the support that the child gets or not will also have an impact on how well they deal with that trauma. That's why it manifests differently in everybody.
Yeah. What would you say is the most sensitive part of a person's life, where if trauma is imposed on them, it can affect them the worst?
I would say that any kind of age before 7 would be, again, because of the unfiltered element of this all, you know, pregnancy is a really difficult time as well. If the mother is using drugs, drinking alcohol, obviously the brain's development in the womb is affected. We know, for example, that if a mother who's pregnant is drinking alcohol, that can cause ADHD. So the brain's development is really, really important. And the spongier the brain is, so the less developed it is, the more likely that the trauma will be worse. But I say this generally speaking because you could meet someone who has a one-off trauma at the age of 13 and it changes their life forever in a way that the person who's experienced it from 2 or 3 just doesn't seem to have the same impact.
Same sort of impact.
Yeah, so it is so relative to, and that's why I mentioned the genetic expression side of it, because some people are just built more resilient. And you know, if you think about athletes and you look at swimmers, their bodies are built for swimming. It's the same with runners or boxers. You can see that people that are really, really good tend to be built that way. And it's the same with the brain-body system. So your genetic expression also has a lot to answer for, or, you know, to be grateful for. And I think this is why it's really difficult to define trauma. And I find that when we overly define trauma, there's people that miss out on getting the support they need, because they'll go, well, that doesn't sound like me. You know, I was maybe sexually assaulted at the age of 14 once, and I'm in a terrible state, but my friend who grew up in this terrible home is fine. So they start to compare themselves against other people, and we can't do that. We've got to look at the individual.
So it's not a comparison game at all?
No, and I think things that are overly used are neurodiversity. You know, there's lots of people that aren't diagnosed that think they are, and trauma. And they're overused not because the person doesn't feel... You know, you've got the right to say, I think I might have trauma, I think I might be sort of neurodiverse or on that spectrum. But because the information is primarily coming through social media now, we're not always getting the right information.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to understand that you have to see a professional. Not always your GP, not always through the NHS. If you can get private support, then certainly do. Because the labels just give us a framework. So once we understand the framework, we can start putting the right tools in place.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here, and I read this it was almost like a study story, and it basically said that this father had two sons, and they were both twins.
Yeah.
And they experienced what you're saying is chronic sort of neglect, and over time, that obviously manifested into chronic trauma. You know, he was abusive to them. He'd strike them. He was an alcoholic. X, Y, Z. He did all these things to them. And when they grew up, one of them was a CEO of this company, and they never released who these people were, by the way. So one of them was a CEO of a company, and one of them was an alcoholic. You know, what's it called, unemployed, etc. And they said, well, why are these two people? It's like kind of like that sort of controlled variable where they've been through the exact same process. It's not as if like they've got years in between where the dad probably treated one differently than the other. They both experienced the same exact thing, but then the outcomes were very different in terms of when they asked them the questions. They said, they asked the alcoholic son, why are you an alcoholic? And his answer was, well, my dad was an alcoholic. They asked the other son, the CEO, why don't you drink alcohol? My dad was an alcoholic. And they went through a series of questions and then the answers were almost identical. Yeah. So how would you explain that?
So it sounds like a client I had who had a very successful business. It was like an escape room business.
Right.
And he was the CEO of that company. His brother, twin brother, same story, was a heroin addict. So very, very similar story. And there's a couple of things there. And then I'm going to go a little bit into my story to answer this as well.
Yeah.
And the epigenetic biology behind it. So those two twins may not have had the same friends. I don't know if they were in the same class at school, but if you're in a different class at school and you've got different sets of friends, your subjective lens is not just about what goes on in the home. This is why I say it manifests differently in everyone. It's also your friendship groups, what you're seeing every day, what you're watching, what you're reading, because you tend to conform to your friendship groups as well. So if they were in separate classes and happened to have separate friendship groups, it could well be that one friendship group was more likely to be sort of following the patterns of what was known, whereas the other friendship group were more like cycle breakers in their attitude. So that can make a difference, but also epigenetics. So epigenetics, and I quote this study all the time for people that are interested, it looks at the genetic expression that's handed down through generations. So you're going to get good and bad epigenetics. So you're going to get, again, if you come from a swimmer's family, you're going to get the swimmer's bodies and you're going to be a good swimmer. But you might also struggle with addictive behaviours because you've got a bit of both going on. So there's good and bad. In 2013, there was a study done on Holocaust survivors and their grandchildren. And it was one of the first major studies of its time. and they tend to skip a generation. So you're likely to have the genetic expression of your grandparents,
right,
and then the learnt behaviours and mannerisms of your parents, and some will come from your parents too, but theirs is likely to come from their grandparents.
Right.
So it skips a generation often. And what happens is, if they go through stress, so me now, if I go through lots of stress now, my grandchild is likely to take on the stress in terms of epigenetics, in terms of genetic expression.
Right. Just before you carry on, why does it skip the generation?
I think it's because it doesn't affect the DNA, but it affects the expression.
Right.
It takes a while to develop into a different expression.
Right, okay. Sorry,
so it cooks. It's basically cooking the genes.
Yeah, it's like a slow cooker.
Yeah, it is. Basically like a slow cooker. It just takes a while for it to be expressed through the next lot of people.
Okay.
And as a result of that, so this particular study looked at the Holocaust survivors, and their grandchildren had higher levels of anxiety, depression and stress disorders than the other group who had no known trauma. So we can see how, in that case now, talking about siblings and twins, it could be that one twin, again, having a different set of friends, it could be that they also had more of an epigenetic expression from one of the grandparents, and the other one had more of a genetic expression from another grandparent. So again, that's where resilience can come from. So it can happen, but also each individual has their own interests and their own things that they like or dislike. So even if they're identical twins, there's still going to be differences because they're not the same person. So in my family, just to give context, the reason I became interested in trauma was because I grew up in an abusive household. My dad sexually abused me for several years, went to prison, came back out of prison, went back into the home. And I've got two siblings. And I don't speak to my parents now, but when it came to my family, I often remember feeling like I was treated differently. And my mum would say, I don't treat you differently to your brother and sister. But the very fact that I'm a different person means that she needed to treat us differently. You can't treat everybody the same. So I think even with twins, they're going to have different needs to each other. But what happens is we tend to parent them the same. So we expect them to be the same. And like I said, your subjective lens is built up of so many different factors: your epigenetics, your friendship circles, your interests, and what happens to you.
Yeah, I remember seeing a famous psychologist say that, because one person kind of asked the same question I've just asked you. The difference is obviously the identical twins born at the same time. That's where obviously things change, because a lot more things become controlled then.
Yeah.
But this person basically stated, I'm a highly successful person, and my siblings are, basically DOSers and whatnot, not doing much. He said, how is that even possible, considering we came from the same background, same parents, same this, same that? And the guy was just like, let me stop you there. He goes, it's not the same. He goes, like, because there's years in between you, the sort of way your parents adapted through parenting, they had to treat every child differently. Not only through that lens, but then also through the lens of each child is different. They have different personalities. They react differently. Yeah, and then obviously girls versus boys. He said it's almost like different. It's so different than you'd think.
It's true, and I do work with twins. I've got a couple of at the minute, and I've always worked with twins, which has always been fascinating. I jump at the chance to work with twins because you can see difference. I mean, I've got a set of identical girl twins at the minute, and also, luckily, I've got a set of identical boy twins, and they've both got different personalities on both sides. So the girl twins, again, identical twins, one of them's more anxious, so she's got a lot more health anxiety, and the other one's a bit more like, just get on with it. But they're identical twins. And with the brothers, they're both in business together, but one's much more process-driven and one's much more creative. So you can see there, they might be identical, but their personalities are different. So I think that would have been apparent early on. I mean, particularly with the young girls, they're 14. So, and their brains aren't fully developed, whereas the boys are a bit older. I think they're in their 30s now. So you can see that they are different people. They just happen to be very close in genetic expression. It doesn't mean they're exactly the same.
Yeah.
So this is the same for all of us, by the way. It's a mixture of your environment, your epigenetics, your friendship groups, what you're exposed to in terms of culture. And I think that's really important to remember is when we try and define and label people, we're actually not doing anyone a service. We have to look at everyone individually. And through my doors, I'm going to see people that you would go, oh my God, I can't believe that's happened. Sex trafficking, human trafficking. And then you're going to get someone else coming in who's been through relatively a lot less, but their system doesn't manage it as well. And that's why we can't be we pathologise everything, and we stop looking at the individual as a result of that. Yeah. And I always say, look at the individual first and then blend into the collective, not the other way around. Yeah. And that way you tend to, and as an individual, you know, with my own story, but also working with thousands of others, we only ever want to be seen and heard. And a lot of our traumas are a result of not being seen and heard. Even with a one-off trauma, like a military thing, how people are treated by the healthcare providers really matters. I mean, there's a lot of gaslighting that goes on, you know, especially with vets. I think because so many veterans get on quite well afterwards. The ones that don't, they're almost being gaslit. But we have to look at their childhood, and we have to look at why they're struggling more, and not pathologise and bunch people into categories. It doesn't help.
Yeah, just because they've lost a leg doesn't explain why they might be behaving. Why they might be behaving.
Yeah.
One thing I just want to confirm. So basically, you said that your environment can affect your genetics. That is a proven thing.
Yes.
So can you just deep dive into that a little bit more?
Think about. I'm going to try and simplify this because it can get really complicated. So think about if you go through something repeatedly. So there's a couple of ways of looking at this. I'm going to talk about the brain and then I'll talk about the body. So I always say repetition is recognition. And what that means is every time your brain goes through the process of repeating something new, good or bad, the neurons in the brain act like magnets. So in the brain, there's a synaptic space, and then with repetition, the neurons fire together and wire together, and there's a synaptic pulse that glues them together. That's like a little electrical pulse. Then repeating that over and over again even more solidifies it, and it becomes automatic. The body's the same. So that's the brain. So we're wiring the brain through repetition. And then the fascia. So the fascia is the spider's web, if you like, underneath everything. And everything entwines with it and, you know, is wrapped around it, and it's wrapped around that. So it's like this, like I say, this web that holds everything together. The fascia, if you go through something over and over again, be it trauma or stress, starts to remember the shape. So often people sit with their shoulders really, really high if they're stressed. But whatever it is that happens to your body, the body will remember. So that the fascia will tighten up and contract, and then the lymph struggles to drain effectively.
Right.
And with that, it will drag. Now, if that happens, you're not in a flow state. Also, when you repeatedly release cortisol, which is why I say repetition is recognition, you're releasing acid into the system, because that's what cortisol is. It's corrosive. It's like battery acid. That inflames the system. If we inflame the system, the brain-body system, now our immune system is going to have to work harder to protect us. Yeah. The cortisol's going through all of the organs. So now the organs aren't going to work as effectively.
So you're in a stressful state.
You're in a stressful state all the time. Your body adapts to that. Your cells adapt to that. Your cells remember everything. And so as we're then going through our experience, the genetic expression also remembers. So it's altered. And think of it as codes. So instead of thinking about your genetic expression as a solid mass, think about it as codes. The codes change because it goes, all right, you're always in a state of stress. So that's no longer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And so that's then handed down through the generations.
Yeah. So obviously, I remember watching one of your TED Talks, and you said that trauma is almost stored in the body.
Yeah,
so
it is.
Is that kind of like what you're talking about? It's stored.
Yeah, it's stored and it's remembered. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. I always reference that one because it talks about what actually happens to the body through chronic trauma and stress. And it's really important to note that we've got trillions and trillions of cells. And they work like a military operation underneath the skin. So you've got your fascia, which is holding it all together, that remembers how to hold itself, and therefore it's instructing the body how to be held. Think of it like a puppeteer. Yeah. And then you've got all the cells. So we start off as a stem cell and an embryonic cell, and we keep multiplying and multiplying until we become the human. And your stem cells make up your bone, your blood, your tissue, everything. And they all, you know, it's all pre-coded. So, for example, when someone gets pregnant, this is the miracle, by the way. When someone gets pregnant, the pregnant person doesn't have to instruct, now make eyes, now make brain. It's just in the code. So whatever you think of, whether it's God, whether it's the universe, whether it's a miracle, whatever you want to call it, everything is pre-coded. Everything is known. So if you think of it as all numbers, and every single cell has got its unique code, and then when your body's going through this trauma and stress and it's repeated, the code is remembered, or it will slightly altered so that your body can adapt to that stress.
Yeah.
So it's all very, very clever.
So once you've experienced trauma, you know, like say like you've come through an abusive house, or you've experienced a one-off trauma, what are the first steps to healing from trauma?
The first thing is to recognise that you have gone through some level of stress, because one of the problems with childhood trauma, let's say, I mean, if someone's blown up in the military, I think we all go, oh, that's definitely trauma. But if someone's grown up in a household where they don't know that it's not normal, so you don't know that, you know, constant fighting or constant beatings or poverty is not normal, you get to a certain age and you kind of think this is how it's supposed to be. You've got nothing to compare it to. It's only when, you know, children go to secondary school and then they might notice, because they start to compare against their friends, or they're on social media and they notice that way. Now they start to know that they're different, but they haven't got the ability, going back to the prefrontal cortex, they haven't got the ability to analyse the information yet.
Yeah.
So they know something's different, but they don't know what that actually means.
Yeah, so they can reason with it, but they can't identify the actual.
So often they wouldn't know that they're in a traumatic situation, and they're not speaking about it because they don't have the vocabulary or the understanding or the emotional intellect yet to know what's going on. So first of all, we have to identify trauma, and if it's happening in the child's home, it does require a village to raise a child. So it means that the systems have to pick up on it. Going back to my point that I made earlier, we're seeing that so many systems are broken. We have too many people, and we don't have enough time to deal with those people. Class sizes have got bigger, and the strain on the systems or on the NHS even is so much more than it used to be. So what we have is that it's not being identified early enough. Then, of course, we've got the traumas, talking about environment, of what kids can see on their phones. You know, you can literally see someone being murdered on your phone now. And they're becoming desensitized. They don't know that's traumatic. But for the human experience, it is. So let's look at all of those factors. There might be some problems in the house: poverty, neglect, abuse. The systems can't identify it because they haven't got time. Additionally, kids are on their devices all the time, seeing pornography, murder, violence. Then they're gaming, which, by the way, on its own isn't a problem, but depending on the games they're playing and how much time they're spending on the games, are they getting out of their house? Have we got the system to allow the child to get out of the house and actually be safe and play and have community?
Yeah.
So community's gone. So they get to 17, 18, and they might look around and go, well, everybody else is going through this. I don't think it's traumatic. So they're not talking about it. They haven't identified it. So we must identify it first. And then you could argue, well, if they don't know they've got it, why would we identify it? The point is, though, the way the brain and the body system, going back to the coding of the cells and the way the fascia holds and the way the brain is wired, if we don't identify it, behaviours that are not healthy become normalised.
Yeah.
So these people then go into society, they might commit crimes themselves. We're seeing a lot more stabbings as the last 5 years have gone by. So what they're seeing is creating more violence. So the first step is to identify whether it's trauma or not. Are these maladaptive traits? Yes, they are. The next step is that the person themselves actually has to want to do something about it.
So, follow me here. Someone experiences trauma. Have you ever seen it where they can get to a level where that is now their new baseline, where they're no longer experiencing the physiological results of the trauma because that is their new baseline? Have you ever seen that?
So, in other words, the trauma is almost negated because it's become so normalised.
Because it's normalised, yeah. Is that like...
I think that's...
is that like psychopathology?
Well, sort of. It's more dissociation.
Right.
So, in other words, I don't... So, and I can speak about this from experience. So going through the traumas that I went through with violence and sexual abuse in the home, and then dad going to prison, then coming back out, there was a lot of instability as well as fear. And I would say that I didn't know that I had trauma because, to give time reference, I'm 47, so when this was happening, this is over 30 years ago, nobody really we didn't have the services that we have now. We didn't have the conversation about mental health, trauma, and all of this stuff. And I didn't know anyone that had been sexually abused, although obviously there was loads of people that had. No one spoke about it. So I wouldn't have known that I had trauma. I just was very angry and rageful. So I don't think you could ever find someone that's physiologically not carrying trauma. They're dissociated from their trauma. What can happen to the brain, talking about narcissism and, psychopaths and sociopaths, is that the empathy is turned onto themselves, so they can't think about, because their needs have never been met as a child, for example, so they have to meet their own needs. So in order to do that as a child, the child in the developing stage, especially around ego boundaries forming, they can't think about anybody else. They have to think about themselves because their needs aren't being met, and eventually the empathy dial goes down. So they tend not to have empathy for other people. It's all about them. So they can develop very narcissistic traits. And you do see that more and more now because everyone's on their phones. Yeah. They're all connected to something here. They're not connected to what's around them. So that doesn't mean we've got narcissists and psychopaths. It means we've got more traits of those quite dangerous personality disorders, more traits than ever before.
Were they more like dissociating rather than actually taking into account what's happening?
Yeah. So they might not identify it. And as a result of not identifying that they're carrying trauma, they may not speak about it, and they may not know that they've got it, because it's easier for them to go and drink alcohol or escape through drugs or escape through porn or any of these other addictive behaviours, because it helps in the short term, floods the brain with dopamine, and risk does the same. But by the time they're 25, their dopamine receptors are so overused and hijacked that now they've got no pleasure.
Yeah.
And they have to do more and more risky or pleasurable things to...
And that's where the depression increases and then the suicide rates come. That makes a lot of sense. So going back to that thing you were talking about a minute ago, you were talking about obviously things that are associated with trauma, your gaming, your digital use, like porn, things like that. So if you were to take away things that you could control, because at the end of the day, parents can't control everything, but they can control things like gaming, things like internet use, social media. So if you were to optimize an environment for a child, you made a point a minute ago about saying schools there's too many adults or too many class sizes, so that you're not receiving what you need to be receiving. What is the optimum sort of environment for a child to grow up in where they are sort of not receiving that trauma?
I think we need to go all the way back to more and more outdoors. I mean, most boys, for example, aren't really ready for school until, I would say, I'm going to push it to 15. Not all boys, but I think most boys aren't really ready to learn. They want to move their bodies and be practical. So you could certainly do outdoor activities and, teaching them trades and how to build and how to make things, lots of movement. But I don't think they're ready really to sit in a classroom full of 31 other kids and look at a whiteboard, a digital whiteboard at that, because they've got rid of all the old-fashioned blackboards. With schools that are so overstretched, there's so many locums. They don't call them locums, what they call supply teachers. Where they're not... I'm not saying that's everybody's situation, but I think post-pandemic we've seen that a lot.
That's the average.
That's the average. There's not a lot of stability and consistency. Yeah. So they're not even building relationships with their teachers. Go back to when I was at school. Again, it's a very long time ago, over 30 years ago, but we had the same teachers. We knew who our teachers were going to be. We had relationships with them. And, of course, they had relationships with us. So they would see if something wasn't quite right with the child. So really, optimum, I think we need a lot more outdoor, to be honest. I think we need a lot more practical skills being taught early on for boys. I think girls need as much outdoor, forest walks, all of these things in the primary school ages. By the time it gets to secondary school, I think 20 would be a maximum for a classroom size with consistency. And so what do we need to do? We need to look at paying teachers more money. We need to make it looking schools slightly smaller. We need to do a lot more outdoor work with children. Same with the parents, by the way. I've got an 18-year-old. And, the first 4.5 years of her life predominantly spent outside with me. I had a dog and I would run and she'd come in the running pram with me. So we could be out 2 or 3 hours a day outside, didn't matter what the weather was. And as she got older, we'd pick up things to make things with at home, lots of arts and crafts. But now, if the parents are on their phones and you've got a 1-year-old sitting watching TV or on an iPad. Because what's happening is a lot of these young kids, they're given a digital device, they sit slumped over in their high chairs or on their little chairs. By the time
the
they
iPad
get
babies.
Yeah, they're iPad babies. So their postures, I mean, I'm doing this, I don't think people will be able to see me, but they're sort of folded over by the time they get to primary school. So we want kids to be sitting up straight. If you look at a healthy child, their spine's so straight, they're like little dancers because their backs are perfect. So many of them now are turning up to school with a bent over spine because they've spent most of their first few years on an iPad. And the parents do the same, they're not getting eye contact.
Yeah.
So their relational skills aren't the same, their interpersonal skills aren't there. They get to the school's got 30 kids in it, the teachers are already stressed. So we're broken, basically, and I don't mean to sound like it's all doom and gloom, but you have to remove the digital devices. They shouldn't be given to kids. I don't think any child should have and I know people are going to think it's mad. I don't think any child before the age of 16 should have a digital phone, iPad.
No,
I think that...
Fully agree.
Yeah, I do. And then, of course, society has changed massively. I realise that relationships break down, but... what's happening to the parenting? They're splitting up, they're falling out, they're not co-parenting well, and now we're expecting the schools to look after our kids. A lot of parents are anyway. They're going to breakfast club, after school club. They're in a school environment all day long. They're very rarely getting out. And then unless you are in a position of some wealth, the after school clubs cost a lot of money. So what's happening to those kids after they go home? They're going on their games and they're going on their phones or they're going on their iPads. That in itself, developmentally, is causing a huge problem neurobiologically.
Yeah, it's something massive I see. Like I've seen a lot of like memes lately of like just pictures of like crowds of people, whether they're children or adults, and it basically takes away the phone from the hand and everyone's just like looking at the hand. It's just like how strange of an environment it is. And it's something, obviously, because I'm in that industry, it's something that I see massively. I agree with everything you said about the way we should be teaching our kids.
Yeah.
Something that changed massively for me, I spoke about this a while ago to Reese, and I was saying when I was in high school, I think it was like year 9, you get your options of what you want to choose.
Yeah.
And I remember my year was the first year they rolled this English baccalaureate thing out. I'm not sure if you remember what it was, but basically it was, you used to have 4 options. So you could, I think back in the day, I would have probably chose like PE, media, business, and I can't remember the other one, but like, you know, like your DT, like hands-on sort of subjects where you're fiddling with stuff and, you know, making stuff. And my year was the first year where they rolled this English baccalaureate in, where you had to do a language, you had to do a humanity, you had to do triple science, and then you got one choice to do. So then you chose your PE. And I remember I didn't really think of it too much at the time. Obviously, I was gutted, I was annoyed, I didn't want to be in a classroom all the time. But then as I got older, I thought that is why. When I seen a stat, sorry, I'll fast forward and I'll come back. I seen a stat and it basically said that most people who go to university now, 75% of them are women, and that men don't want to go to university, they don't want to stay in higher education. And the first thing I thought of was, well, it's because they're forcing education on men, like,
yes, they are.
Or just in general.
And they're not ready for it. They're not ready for it.
It's hard to say when they are ready for it. I'll be honest, I don't know if it's as late as 15, but it's definitely not what it is now. But I only say that,
and that's probably more based on, if I'm being honest, the modern day. Because 15-year-olds have grown up with devices in their hands. Yeah. So I think their brains have been so hijacked. So I think it can take that long, because you think of the attention span. There's a lot of kids that don't have ADHD that appear to have ADHD because of the dopamine hijacking. And so probably prior to that, say if we go back to when I was a kid, it probably would have been about 7 or 8 that I think a lot of boys would have been ready to concentrate. I think it's getting later because of that issue. Yeah,
like, I mean, at the end of the day, you have to tackle something extreme. You have to be extreme.
Yeah, you do.
So I think, like for example, Australia have done it now, haven't they?
Yes.
They've banned kids from social media until they're 16. One of the best things they could do for the country. If we did that here, not that it would just cure everything overnight, but you would start seeing these kids more, like, you know, be more proactive. You know, they'd be joining football teams, gymnastics, like, you know, like gyms are dying, gymnastics teams are dying, and all these things. It's like, well, why? It's just because every kid has an iPad,
but also funding.
has an Xbox, and it's just not that interesting. Or, well, people think that it's not that interesting. But one thing I have seen is when you get kids involved in those physical things, they do prefer it.
Yeah, they do.
They do, but they just don't.
Don't we all, though?
Yeah, of course we do. Like, I prefer being physical. It's like, you spend a day in the house all day and you're on your phone or in bed. You get to the end of that day, you feel like shit.
So imagine what these kids feel like. They don't know any different.
Yeah, their brains, like you said before, their brains aren't developed as well, so they can't perceive it like we can.
That's right.
So
when we're looking at the fundamentals of the family breakdown, or abuse and neglect and poverty, which we know a lot of people, and the poverty bit, by the way, I'm not blaming the families for, that's a societal problem. But again, this is a systemic issue because the government are not funding support for families. It's almost like this government doesn't want us to have proper family time. It doesn't support families anymore.
Yeah.
It's get your kids back to school. Sorry, get yourself back to work as quickly as you can. Put them in the nursery, then put them in the breakfast club, then put them in the after school club. And the school system is already overstretched, so they're spending a lot of time in a school where I'm not saying primary school because I think that's a lot more nurturing, but certainly secondary schools. Look, it's a real problem.
Yeah.
And more we're seeing county lines issue, we're seeing knife issues, we're seeing drug issues. It's just really getting to quite a concerning place. So trauma now, to go back to your question, it's all of that. Do you see how complicated it is?
No, of course. It's like a multifaceted problem.
Because even if someone's dissociated, even if they don't know they've got trauma, wait till they're in their 20s and 30s and having their own families. How are they supposed to parent? It's going to become, what happens is the human race changes as a result of genetic expression and learnt behaviours and societal behaviours and cultural behaviours. So now we're going to see over the next 30 years, we're going to see real problems.
Yeah, we are in like a cultural revolution where things need to change. It's the same with the political landscape at the minute.
Yeah.
Things need to change drastically to get back to, like, people think that we need to advance and go so much further.
That's right.
Whereas I feel like we need to almost peel it back a layer.
Go back to the old days. Go back
to the simple basics of like that, like the food, the diets, the lifestyle, the health. Like I've never, like, I don't know if it's just me getting older, but I've never seen more people start getting involved in the gym so much. Yeah. Supplements, like we talked about off camera. Yeah. People are like starting to realise, you know what, I'm not really too great here. Like, what do I do? And then, like, the answer is more simple than you're willing to admit a lot of the time. But it's just that it's not that dopaminergic sort of hit that you'll get from social media. It's something a bit harder. But like I said, going back to the day that you have, if you spend a day at home on your phone all day, you get to the evening. Or if you've been in bed, you get to the evening, you feel like shit. Whereas you go to the gym, you don't feel like going to the gym.
No.
You probably don't feel like eating very well, but then you get to the end of that day and you feel
great.
Yeah, you feel,
you do get those endorphins, you do get that rush. And the other thing to say is that for people that can't get to the gym, because again, a lot of people that are in financial situations where they cannot stretch to a gym membership, walking 3,000 steps a day is a start. We hear things like get to the gym, do some exercise, go for a run. For someone that's heavily overweight, let's just say they've lived a very sedentary lifestyle, they've been on their phone a lot, they might be 25 years old. A pair of shoes and 3,000 steps a day, you can start there. Yeah. And so as long as you're physically moving your body. And the other thing that we've lost, not everyone, because I know there's a lot of kids that still do this, is reading books. Walking, reading books and just giving yourself time away from digital devices, that's a place to start. Because, look, there's nothing wrong with everything in moderation. But if the diet that you have is predominantly fast food or microwave meals, and you're not getting a lot of vegetables and you're not getting a lot of fresh food, if you're not getting to move your body and you're not doing something other than going on your phone or your laptop, you are going to feel very unwell. Like I said, chronic stress with the acid and the inflammation. You're seeing people now at 25 with bodies like they're 40.
Yeah.
And this is again, that's a ramification of trauma. Now, the trauma may not be what we started with, that sort of explosion or car accident or child abuse, but the body's certainly showing you that your body is in a traumatic state. Yeah,
I was saying this to the gentleman who was on the last podcast. Like, people think that it takes something perfect to get you out of the situation you're in, whereas it isn't. A lot of the time it is that simple. Get a pair of shoes, start walking.
Why do you think we're looking for perfection? Because of social media.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like, you see these perfect bodies and think, oh, I'm not too great here, but I need to be that. So I need to. Well, that's what we were talking about. We were talking about this guy who he was dead overweight. I can't remember how much he weighed, but he was trying to imitate Chris Hemsworth, do you know, the guy who plays Thor.
Oh my God.
He was trying to imitate his lifestyle. And don't get me wrong, he was doing it, but then other people are looking at that thinking, oh, I'll just go and do that.
Yeah.
Like, I'll go and eat 2,500 calories of pure protein a day and do all this workout. It's like, no, just get a pair of shoes, start walking a day, drink some water, go to bed on time, like get your 8 hours of sleep and start there. And then like you can build it up slowly.
And also what we've got to remember, I was saying to you off camera and you mentioned it there, that I've just released a supplement brand. So for the last few years, I've really been looking at not just epigenetics in terms of trauma, but also being a health clinic director, working with lots of different practitioners, I can't even say the word practitioners, from lots of different disciplines. And prior to that, I was working for the NHS. So I've got this real mixed experience of the brain-body system. And going to epigenetics again and genetic expression, some people can eat 2,500 calories a day, put on muscle or lose weight, whatever it is. Some people can't. I have trained for years and years and years, and then took a couple of years off because I had a knee injury. Prior to that, I'd paid for coaches and, and done all of that. And every food plan they gave me didn't work. I just got fluffier and fluffier. And actually, because I didn't feel good about my body, that means fat to people.
Yeah, I did understand as I was going.
Just for those who think, what does fluffy mean? So I just kept getting fatter and fatter. And because I didn't like my body being fatter, prior to that, I'd been very fat and lost lots of weight. So for me, that was a real trigger. I couldn't motivate myself to get to the gym. The more I saw my body looking fat, the less I wanted to go to the gym.
You associated it?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
So I didn't associate going to the gym with getting fat. I just didn't like being in the gym because I felt fat.
Right, okay.
So I felt almost like I shouldn't really be there because I'm fat.
Yeah.
Which I know is a stupid way to think, but going back to your perfection thing, if I'm not small enough to be in the gym, this is how I thought then I shouldn't go to the gym.
Yeah.
Because the gym's for people that are fit and healthy rather than for people that are overweight like me. But I'm only overweight right now because I'm following a diet that doesn't suit my genetic expression. So I don't need to eat a lot. I mean, I'm 5'2", I don't need to eat as much as other people do in order to maintain a good shape and good levels of fitness. So the reason I say this is because we're often looking at, because of social media, we often look at what somebody else is doing and it works brilliantly for them. Eddie Abu is one of these. Now, I don't mean to be rude to Eddie, but I'm not his fan. I don't think that everyone can eat 12 steaks a day with 1,400 eggs and all be healthy. Some people will eat that and be like Eddie. Great, fantastic, well done, Eddie. Some people will eat that and have the worst constipation that you can possibly imagine. They will have the worst stomach pains. They will have no energy because everybody metabolises differently. Same with supplementation. And I'm saying this honestly. Our supplements, my supplements, are to support a system. But some people will metabolise supplementation differently. I don't need as much sleep as other people. Some people need more sleep, some people need less. So again, going back to that, whether it be trauma or health, individuals first, collective second, not the other way around. Social media goes, just do this, this and this, and you can be whatever you want to be.
Exactly. I think you've summed that up perfectly. Just to go into this, obviously the supplements that you're advocating for at the minute, and obviously you've invested into them. What are some of the supplements and what do they offer? So
for me, when we're looking at lifestyle, and when we're looking at the human experience, and when we look at modern day, first of all, we've got gaps in education. We've also got gaps in nutrition now. So where possible, you want to get all of your supplementation, i.e. all your nutrients from food. You want to look after yourself inside out. You want to be moving your body, all those things. Less time on social media, less time on your devices. But for those people that need to be on devices a lot, they're working on laptops or whatever, for those people that can't get out and do their 3,000 steps every day, and for those people that just can't eat, good 3 meals of nutritious food, supplementation supports. So the supplements that I've started with, we've got a longevity blend. Now, I chose supplements to start with that complement the brain-body system because obviously with stress, with trauma, we know that cortisol depletes the immune barrier struggles to work, but also when we put pressure on the liver, because the liver is so important in processing emotions, so when we're in a very stressed state, our liver takes a hit, our diet, fatty diets, alcohol, affects the liver. So we wanted to look at supplements that supported the whole system. So we've got the longevity one, which is for people that are a little bit older. You can start that in your 30s. And it's a blend of ingredients, including NR, which is a precursor to NAD, which is brilliant for focus and clarity in the brain and keeping the brain strong. Creatine. So creatine, everyone thinks is like a muscle recovery thing when you go to the gym, but actually lots of research been done over the last few years that shows it's brilliant for the brain tissues. There's something called ATP, which is basically where the creatine gives energy to the cells. And so when we're looking at cognition and we're looking at clarity and focus, particularly for women, perimenopausal women or ADHD people, it gives really good clarity and brain cognitive ability. Then there's also lion's mane. I've got ADHD as well as complex PTSD, which I had before. So lion's mane was always going to be one of those to add into that. So already you can see that we've got lots of brain stuff going on there. Lion's mane has been studied to show that it can be helpful for things like focus and clarity. And then berberine, milk thistle, these are good for metabolism, for gut health, and then also collagen. So that's your skin and your joints and all those wonderful things, as well as the brain. So these supplements, they're all about brain body. They're all about supporting. But ideally, start with diet and exercise first, then move on to stuff. I think the problem is now we live in a society where it's like, right, I'll go and get the Burger King and then I'll supplement and I'll be fine. There is a space for that, but that shouldn't be the way we do it. We want, and Novus DNA, which is the brand, it means new life. And it's all about educating as well. So yes, I want you to buy the supplements, of course do, that's the business, but I also want you to be educated and know, if I'm going to take this supplement, why am I taking it? And key here, by the way, was supplementation. And one of the reasons I went into supplements was this very reason. I used to buy all of mine from supermarkets or Amazon, and it would turn up and it would be like, I don't know, vitamin D or vitamin C. And it could be a blend of something else fancy. Hair, skin and nails. And I'd look at the ingredients and there'd be like 40 ingredients in there. And what that means is there's loads of bulking agents and fillers. These are not filled with crap. So your ingredients are there for what you're supposed to, be supporting your system with. And it means you've got increased bioavailability. With a lot of these ingredients, you're going to weed them out. So you're not actually going to get the benefit, and your body can't absorb the nutrients in the supplement. So my point being there is you could spend 40 quid a month on supplements that are doing nothing, or pick your supplements properly, understand what you're taking and why, and actually absorb the nutrients.
In the correct doses as well.
In the correct doses.
I think one thing that's always baffled my head about supplements is like how uneducated people are. Like they just buy vitamin D and take vitamin D because they might be vitamin D deficient or whatever. And people when you look at the protein or whatever it is in terms of nutrition, people forget that a supplement, you said the exact word I always use, it's a supportive thing. It's not like a replacement. I remember speaking to this girl, and I always tell this story. She was on like a self-development process, and she was trying to lose all this weight and gain muscle and get the gym body, whatever. And I was talking, and she was like, "Oh, I'm having trouble with this. I'm having trouble with that. Like my cognitive ability is like diminishing, and this and that." I'm like, "Right, well, let's just peel it back. Like, what are you doing?" She was doing a lot of things, right? She was going to the gym. Her program was pretty good. And I was like, "Well, what are you eating?" And then she was saying like, "Oh, I don't really have a massive appetite. I'm eating mainly just fruit and stuff." I'm like, "Right, so where's your protein coming from?" She goes, "Oh, well, I have three protein shakes a day."
You see how much crap is in that?
And I was just like, but not just that. I was like, that's a supplement. I was like, that 20 grams of protein you get in a protein shake,
nutrition,
is meant to like add on top of the 50, 60 grams you're getting from chicken for a meal or whatever. And she was like, "Oh, right. Well, I was speaking to my PT, and he just said if I'm struggling to meet my protein diet, just have as many protein shakes as I want." And I was like, honestly,
that's what I mean about education. It's so poor that anyone would say, I mean, maybe she's misinterpreted what that PT said, but really, it's your food first.
Yeah, exactly.
You think about hunters and gatherers. So the gatherer would be getting all the berries, usually the woman or the female, and all the fruits and veg from the land, and he'd go out for his big bit of protein. And he could be gone for a week, but he'd come back with a massive carcass. I know this is quite vile for those that are vegetarian and vegan, but that's true. That's what would happen, and that would feed the clan for a little while. And you kind of go, look, protein for women in particular as we age, and I know this because I'm heading towards menopause very fast. And it's really important that women know this, because a lot of them think, if you don't go to the gym, how many people that don't go to the gym think about the protein? You see, it's usually I'm going to the gym, I need to think about my protein. You really should be trying to get 30 to 50 grams of protein. I think isn't it 1 gram per pound
per
of weight?
1.5 per kilogram. So I'm not sure about pounds, but
yeah, I think
kilogram.
it works out about the same. I always think of it simple. So I think I weigh 126 pounds. So I need to have at least 126 grams of protein a day. Yeah. That's the easiest way to remember it. You need to be thinking, so people go, oh, where do I get my protein from? Well, eggs is a good source of protein. Chicken. Mm-hmm. Even, and I recently discovered this, my breakfast, I don't know how interesting this is for people, but I find it interesting. My breakfast is a sweet potato.
Interesting.
Blended with Greek yogurt and mixed into that, and that's got cinnamon and whatever else in it, usually flaked almonds and a bit of desiccated coconut and some berries and maybe a bit of chopped apple. And then walnuts as well, by the way. And then 100 grams of cooked brown rice. In 100 grams of cooked brown rice, you're getting really good slow-release carb, but you're also getting 18.1 grams of protein.
Interesting.
And you get the same, get really high quality. So for people that are vegan or vegetarian, which I used to be, I'm not now, I'm a meat eater now. You get good protein from lentils, from your legumes. So there's loads of ways you can get your protein in, even if, tofu and soya can be a nice added extra if you're vegan. But if you're vegan, you need to make sure you're getting your B12. That's really, really important. A lot of people are very deficient in that. Yeah. So essentially, protein isn't just meat and eggs. There's loads of, and you can get it through your vegetables as well. A lot of green leafy veg have got some protein in. So the important thing is that you understand what you're supposed to be eating.
Yeah, and actually trying to eat some whole foods, because I remember Stephen Bartlett got a lot of heat. Do you know his Huel drink?
Oh yeah.
Because obviously, like the way because he's a master marketer, so the way he's marketed it, it's come across as if this is a meal in a drink, and took some people taking it very literally, and some guy was having it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, just drinking this thing.
It's terrible.
And then he got severely ill, and obviously he got a lot of heat for that. But yeah, people need to know that. You need to eat organic food, supplements after. How did you put it before? You said it quite well. You said
about supporting the system.
You said supplements later, something first.
I think I said you need to be looking at, just to repeat that, I don't know if I'll repeat it exactly, but you need to be looking at sleep, movement, good food and nutrition, then supplements. Supplements must be added on. Now, the reason that I say that is because if you've got all of those three things, sleep's crucial, by the way, for mental health as well. And often poor mental health can really disrupt sleep. So sleep's a really important one to get right. And for those with trauma or ADHD or neurodiverse conditions, sleep is a major, major problem. So sleep, movement, nutrition, then supplementation.
Obviously, a lot of people go with the supplements. They go onto this sort of self-development journey.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the self-development journey, where is the line between self-development and self-avoidance? Because a lot of people go through trauma. They think, whether it's a breakup or whatever, or they lose someone, or whatever happens in their life, and then they want to try and better themselves. But where is that line between, like I said, that self-development and then avoiding?
Well, working as a psychotherapist and a trauma specialist, I can answer this question as honest as I can. A lot of people are escaping. They're not actually doing self-development. They're doing a lot of things like cold water therapy and going on lots of retreats and juicing for a month or whatever it is they're doing. They might be doing some meditation practice. Now, all of those things are fine. I'm not knocking any of those practices. But if you've got severe stress or trauma or dissociation, so you're numb, then we need to be looking at rewiring and recalibrating the brain-body system. As I said before, just to weave this back in, neuroplasticity, so the way we're wiring the brain through repetition, which is also felt in the body. In fact, a lot of people are bottom-up processors. So, when we talk about, I will answer this question, but when we talk about intuition and gut instinct, we're receiving the messages sometimes first in our body, ignoring it because we can't make it a logical thing. So we go, I'll probably ignore that red flag. It's probably just me. And then it turns out 6 months later you were right. Your intuition was right, because we're getting all of these neurotransmitters in the gut telling us something's not right. But we haven't processed it up here first. So that's bottom-up processing. With trauma, people often feel it and stress. They feel it in their bodies. They know something's not right, but they can't make logical sense of it. So what happens is they end up ignoring it and escaping. So there's 2 methods that I use predominantly when it comes to trauma. Well, 3, and I've combined them to make the neuroelectrics method. Neuro meaning brain, electrics, electric, so rewiring. And really it's a combination of psychoanalysis. So we come away from pathologization with psychoanalysis and we look very much at the subconscious processing and what that might mean. Then we use practices such as, but not exclusively, hypnotherapy and EMDR. So I'm trained in EMDR and hypnotherapy, as well as psychoanalysis and other psychological tools and other forms of psychotherapy, but they're the ones I lean into, bringing them together in a unique method that can be flexible and fluid around the individual. So I use something called free association, which is a Freudian thing, but I've called it free flow analysis. And I've combined that with hypnotherapy tools and EMDR tools. Now, EMDR means eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing, but you don't need to use eyes. And the reason I say that is because it's actually about bilateral movement. So for those that have never heard of this, bilateral movement happens organically in the brain when we go into REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. And basically the eyes at the back of the head move left, right, left, right, left, right very quickly. During that time of sleep, what happens is the brain calibrates and collaborates all the information and applies it with an emotional label. So if you did something that was really, really fun, the memory stores that with the feeling of fun. If something's very, very traumatic, the event is stored in the brain with the feelings of fear or whatever it was that was happening at the time. Depending on the level of trauma or the way your brain has processed that level of trauma, that can get frozen in time and applied with that label for a really long time. So when people are stuck in trauma loops, be it dissociation, as we sort of spoke about earlier, or fear or anger, what's often happening is that they're stuck at the time that the trauma happened. So in other words, emotionally, they've not really developed past that point when it comes to certain emotions.
Right.
So what we do with eye movement or with any form of bilateral stimulation is we're now positively manipulating the brain, going back into that memory, although it doesn't need to be spoken about. The person can do this themselves, guided by the therapist. And we're starting to move the perception. Because going back to what I was saying about trauma earlier, trauma is relative to the person. And the way it manifests in that person is dependent on that personality, on that identity, on their subjective identity. So once we start moving the perception and changing the emotions and the physical state, which is what neuroelectrics does. We look at the physical state, we look at the emotions, we look at the meaning, but we're using something or the tools of hypnosis to be able to relax them enough to get there. And then we're analysing using psychoanalysis what comes up in the free flow analysis. Now, you do like 30 seconds to a minute of bilateral stimulation. That could be done with audio tapping, eyes, physical tapping, or any other left, right movement. And what happens is during the recalling the memory, I would then leave them for 30 seconds or a minute, bringing that memory to the forefront, which is where it's very much like EMDR. And then when they tell me what's going on, I start to use suggestion, hypnotic suggestion, or just any ideas that we might have discussed previously, colours, sounds, sensory details. I might even bring in silly things like replay that memory and imagine you're listening to circus music. So now the circus music is weaved into the original memory.
So you're associating it.
And because you're using bilateral stimulation, remember, when we go into REM sleep, the brain is collaborating the information at that point.
Of what you've just done.
Yeah.
Right.
But they can be in a hypnotic state when I do this as well. So basically they're getting... when we use bilateral stimulation, we bypass the critical analysis. But when we use hypnosis, we go right to the back of the brain, which is the hard drive of the brain, the subconscious.
Right.
So you're sort of using 2 methods at once, and then the way it's analysed and the way that it's moved through is with psychoanalysis and free flow. So in other words, I don't tell you what you've got to do. You will inform me through what's coming up.
So you're just kind of like a commentator on it. You just sit there and do it. How long did it take you to learn how to do all this?
So I started my training about 20 years ago. And then I was never... Going back to the point about the individual, I was never satisfied with just one method, because I would see that what would work really well, hypnotherapy was really good for a lot of people, and I've done it for a really long time. But for others, it just didn't seem to have the same effect. And so rather than thinking, well, that's their problem, I was curious about, why does this work so well for, let's say, 50% of people? It wasn't 50%. It might have been more than that. But let's just say 50% not. And then you'd hear people would go to CBT therapy, or they'd do this therapy or that therapy, and they'd go, it wasn't very good. And I'd trained in so many different modalities, so many different methods of therapy, that I was like, what if we start piecing this together? And instead of me saying you as the individual have to do A, B, and C, and that's the therapy, like it or lump it, I was like, what if they tell me what's going on, and I use this sort of group of methods that I'm really familiar with to blend around them.
To tailor it to that person.
So actually what happened is, although the neuroelectrics method, as I train others to do it, is really important to, for example, you wouldn't do anything practical if I can, because I've been doing it for such a long time, but if you're a new practitioner with me, you wouldn't be able to do any of the practical methods until session 7.
Right.
Because you have to get to know that person and build that relationship. Yeah. But you're still using methods along the way, so they've always got a program in between each session. So this person that's coming to see them, you're going to get a lot of feedback from the work they're doing in between sessions. So you're getting to know them. You're learning them. They're not having to use your method. They're teaching you who they are. So by the time you get to the practical method, it's designed more for them. It's not a method that's stiff and rigid and limited.
You've almost got a template ready for them. In terms of, you said about the hypnotherapy, going straight to the back of the brain, you're tapping into the unconscious. How does hypnotherapy actually work? Okay,
this is a good question. People don't really ask me about hypnotherapy anymore.
Really?
Yeah, I don't know why.
See, it's something that I do believe it, but I don't think that many people can do it. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's where you're wrong.
I can hypnotise people. I'm like, can you though? I remember a guy trying to hypnotise me, and it just didn't work. And I was like,
was that therapeutically or on a stage?
No, it was just in a pub.
Yeah, those ones are crap.
But that's what I mean. I've met not loads, but I've met a lot. I've never met someone who could say they could do it who could actually do it.
Yeah, that's because you're thinking of hypnotherapy as stage hypnosis.
Right.
So there's stage hypnosis, which is very performative and smoke and mirrors and requires often someone drunk to do something stupid to make it look good. Clinical hypnotherapy is based on the brain. So we talk about, and I never use these words, and I never have in the 20 years that I've used hypnotherapy as part of my clinical practice, I've never used the word trance. Because the minute you use the word trance state, people are like, it sounds psychedelic almost, and I'm never going to be able to get there. So it's basically a deep relaxation. And what happens is if you think about, I'm trying not to complicate this, but if you think about Einstein's theory of relativity, everything's through the observer's lens, okay? And time distortion is real. If you're having a good time, it goes really, really quick. If you're hating your job or hating a particular bit of work you've got to do, it will take all day. An hour could feel like 5 hours, okay? So time distortion is real. With hypnosis, when you get someone's brain relaxed, time speeds up.
Right.
So how we do that is it's called a progressive muscle relaxation. It takes about 10 minutes, and you just do a toe-to-head relaxation with someone. You've got to be skilled. It's got to be in a clinical setting, and you've got to know what you're doing.
So not a pub.
Not in a pub. I mean, that's stage hypnosis, that's entertainment.
Yeah, no,
so if you're like me, no one could do that to me in a pub. I want to be in control way too much. So I hear what you're saying there. So you do the toe-to-head relaxation. In that process, if the person is skilled, your brain waves naturally will start to slow down. So what you're really doing as the facilitator or as the therapist is you're mimicking the natural process of someone falling asleep. Now, clinically, about 2 hours before you go to sleep, this is an ideal time for you to learn something new. Those twilight hours, because your brain waves are slow enough to be able to absorb information, but they're not so slow that you're not listening anymore. So it's like that in-between stage. I always call it the dozing phase of being awake and being asleep. That is an ideal phase. Now, that's what they call the trance state, so the dozy phase. And many of you will have experienced it already, including you. When you've got a film on at home and you just start to close your eyes and feel really sleepy, you can still hear everything, but you're not actively listening anymore. But the information is still being absorbed, because as the brain starts to slow down, the critical layer at the front starts to open up, and the information can go in even if you're not paying cognitive attention. Now, bear in mind that your unconscious is 95%, so you're only using 5% of conscious awareness at any one time. So once you slow down the brain becomes, I guess, more open, more receptive, more spongy. Information goes in, so you go through all the different brainwave states. Now, brainwaves slowing down means we're opening up the back. And we're going to the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is the hard drive of the brain. It's where you hold all your implicit memories. That's why sometimes in hypnosis people will remember things that they'd forgotten.
Right.
We've got to be careful that, and I would never do this, by the way, if someone says, I think I might have been abused as a child, but I can't remember, I'm not facilitating that process, because also imagination is more available to us in hypnosis.
And it could be counterproductive.
Yeah. So you don't encourage that. You would never use it for that. If someone says they can't remember, I say, trust your instincts. Your intuition knows, but I'm not willing to try and find that information.
Facilitate that for you.
Because it could be the imagination creating it. So yeah, once that part's available to us, we're now able to put in new suggestions, repetitions, recognition. So when I do a hypnosis session with someone, I'd record it. I'd ask them to listen to it every night for a few weeks so that the information is going in again and again. It's like learning a new language. If you were to learn French or Spanish on Duolingo and you did it every day, the repetition means that you're building the pathways. So in hypnosis, we're doing exactly the same thing. Repetition till the pathways are built. So it's a neuroplastic process. It's not just one session and you're done. Although I have done a lot of stop smoking over the years and those one-off sessions, so that's a differently put together session. It tends to be very copy, paste, repeat. But generally speaking, with trauma and stuff like that, you've got to do a lot of the audios at home.
And what would you say the success rate is?
It's different for everybody, because, again, going back to my point, I mean, you could look at statistics. Some clinicians might keep them. Everybody's different. So for me, that's why I stopped using just one modality at a time. I started to go, actually, I think you could do a little bit of bilateral work, EMDR-inspired work with this hypnosis. Or I think you need to do a little bit more of the CBT at home. I mean, I tend to put together programs. I think journaling, include all of these things. Think of it like your diet. You need a varied diet. And I think with therapy, if you look at one modality, how successful is it? Well, someone could stop smoking for a year and then start again. Yeah. So how successful is it really? So really what we're looking at, hypnotherapy is a tool, and it should be used as an integrated approach. I think all health, be it supplementation, be it therapy, be it exercise, it's all integrative. We've got to look at the whole thing.
What kind of therapy worked for you best?
For me, I think one of the important things is repetition. So anything that involves repetition, be it, again, walking. I do meditation, but I've got a very specific technique I use, which starts with the breath work. Then I move into Then I have a bit of clear space for myself.
Oh, the noises.
The noise. So a nice humming sound. I need to prepare my body. I can't go from this to straightforward, sit there, do nothing. I have to go through the breath. I have to go through the that's the vibration through the body, and then I can have maybe 5 or 10 minutes of stillness, then I journal straight after. The only other way I can do that is a walking meditation by the river.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So repetition. Because
meditation it's something I was talking to a gentleman about 6 months ago. And I tried the whole, candle on and all that sort of stuff, and it wasn't really working. He was like, he said, you're overthinking it. He said, everyone's different. You know, you need to meditate in your own different way. And he said, where do you feel the most calm? And I was like, well, I feel really calm in the, so I sauna a lot. Yeah. I feel really calm in the sauna. He was like, well, just go in the sauna. Yes. And he goes, just be quiet. He goes, you don't have to you close your eyes, but you don't have to be go into a sleep, because I don't want you to sit back and so that you are going to sleep. And he said, guide yourself sort of through that process of just clear your mind and then just breathe. Yeah. And that's mine now. I can't really meditate in a room. Yeah. It's almost too silent. Yeah. Whereas the sauna just seems like a perfect tranquil state. And also, I mean, don't forget the benefit of mindfulness. It's just about being mindful. That's why I like the breath, because it makes me aware of my body. That's why I like the because I can feel the vibration moving through my vagus nerve and through my chest, and that's comforting to me. And that's why I like being near the river, because I like the sound of the water, and I like being in nature. So it's you have to do something you like when it comes to this stuff. So yeah, for me it's repetition, journaling a lot, and also I think also in terms of getting over my own trauma, it was always a domino effect.
You know, it was like one thing led to another. So I think a lot of people they come to me, I'm very honest with people. I explain exactly what the neuroelectrics method is. I explain that you're going to see me once a month, and in between that, you're going to do a program. If you don't want to do that, that's up to you, but it could take longer. I'm going to give you a program. I'm going to give you the deepest analysis you've ever experienced. And most people that come to me will say, I wish I'd have done this sooner, because the way that they're being seen and heard and understood, and they're seeing so many reflections of themselves with me after 1 hour. And they're like, why is nobody else doing this? And it's because they're not blending. It's because they're fixed in their approach. So I think what's really important is the domino effect and knowing what you're going to get. So if you're going to see a therapist or anyone, you are allowed to ask questions, and you're also allowed to say it's not for me. It's a bit like meditation. It's not like all therapists will suit you.
Yeah.
Like all meditation won't suit you. You've got to find what works for you.
The domino effect you're talking about getting like one thing right that leads to another. So it's like a compounding effect rather than just a one-off session is going to fix your smoking addiction. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a multitude of things. That's interesting. One thing I was reading as well when I was looking into trauma, obviously I was watching a lot of videos and reels and stuff like that. And I think it was Joe Rogan said that almost anyone successful that he knows has had a traumatic past. Yeah. And I thought it was very interesting when I've relayed that to my own experiences, when I've talked to very successful people like yourself, it almost does seem to be true that hand in hand that trauma does sort of go hand in hand and have a positive correlation with success. So is that something that you see, like to be successful, do you have to have a healthy amount of trauma?
I don't think you have to have. I think generally speaking, a lot of successful people have had a lot of trauma, or they've got ADHD or something similar where the brain works slightly differently. See, the thing is with trauma can mimic ADHD in lots of ways. It's not exactly the same.
How so?
Well, dopamine for a start, but also if you think about, so for me growing up, and I now have an ADHD diagnosis, so I know that, and I can look back through my life and see where the ADHD was as well. But with trauma, the way it affects the body and the way it affects the adaptation of the brain. So certainly, how do I explain this? A lot of the executive function is around rational thinking, analytical thinking, organised thinking, all of those things that are really important. What happens with trauma is it often takes away a lot of control, and it takes away a lot of your ability to analyse your situation safely and be logical and all of those things. So you don't build the same skills if it's chronic childhood trauma. So often you'll see a lot of the heightened emotional responses, which are difficult to manage. So you get dysregulated emotions with kids and people that have been through lots of trauma, as you do with ADHD. Also rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is very aligned with ADHD, you see in people with trauma, because it's often the people that were supposed to love them the most that have hurt them. And then of course you've got things that are going on in the body like IBS and joint aches and pains because of the chronic stress response. And then of course they tend to escape their bodies or dissociate from their bodies, so you see similar issues with dopamine. So all of those things are very, very similar, and that's why it's often hard to tell, has someone got borderline personality, have they got chronic trauma, have they got ADHD? A lot of these things appear to be the same. Hence the reason I don't really like pathologisation. You've got to look at the individual. But the reason I say that is because when it comes to the body and when it comes to the way the brain and the body process with trauma, going back to the domino effect and how everything links in, with people that have been very successful, they've had to have resilience and tools to all of these things early on. So by the time they get to 18, 19, their brain has found all these ways to adapt to their traumas. They've built up high levels of resilience, and sadly they're able to cope a bit more with stress because they've always had that baseline. Whereas somebody that hasn't had a lot of stress or a lot of trauma, they don't have the tools yet and the skills yet to cope with things when they go wrong. So they tend not to have the same ability to problem solve, because when you've gone through a lot of stress and trauma, you've got to problem solve, but you've also had to be dissociated from the stress. Yeah. So you can, that's where dissociation and success, they're both a blessing and a curse. I would say that I'm a workaholic. I work ridiculously long hours and never stop, and I've always, again, with the ADHD type, new idea, I can never just be satisfied. So I have to go on to the next thing. As soon as I've completed half of a mission, luckily I managed to finish them all in the end, but it's a lot of stress. And I don't want to glamorise that either, because we can do a lot of damage in terms of, look, it goes back to everything we've said. If you're stressed all the time and your immune barrier is lower, those little cancerous cells that are starting to swim around in your system, if you've got no energy to keep them apart because the energy is being used to get the inflammation down, that's why we're seeing higher rates of cancer, as well as diet and all of these other factors. It's high levels of stress.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Like I've seen a lot of on the internet, and I have personally again asked people, like, you know, what are the biggest predictors for success, like, you know, in people and whatever, or business. And probably the most answered the most what's the word, common answer is how well they do with stress, how well they deal with it, how well they can process it. And and again, I've seen that from the people in my life who I look up to, some of my heroes. You know, you give them a high level of stress, whether it's a certain scenario that's happened or an incident, and it's just like, right, okay, here's how we're going to solve it. And it goes hand in hand. But it's interesting how you said, like, you know, the actual understanding that I feel like I've come around full circle now in terms of understanding why they become like adapted to that stress, and that, like, it almost, you know, initiates going forward how they're going to deal with that stress.
That's right.
But what would you say that suffering teaches you? So when people have this trauma and have this sort of neglect or whatever it is in their life, what does suffering teach you that comfort can't?
Very good question. Now, that's a process. Going back to what we were saying about subjective lenses earlier, I think one of the things that happens early on is that a lot of people that go through a lot of trauma have to abandon themselves to survive. So suffering can often mean that you become a broader thinker, because you're not thinking about just yourself in the way that you should probably as a child to naturally develop. You're meant to be very egotistical until you're about 11 or 12. So if trauma's going on before that time, you've abandoned yourself and you're focusing on what's going on in the environment. So suffering can give you a broad lens, and it can give you, as I said before, the ability to problem solve and work things out. You've got to be careful with that you don't burn out and you don't get into those really maladaptive levels of stress. But also, when you're working through it, and this took me a long time to get here, by the way, is once you understand certain aspects of why people behave the way they do, and often, if you've gone through trauma, you've spent your life trying to work out why people behave the way they do to protect yourself from getting hurt, it can also lead you into being a kinder, more balanced person, because you don't look at things as good and bad anymore. You look at why things happen the way they do. Yeah. And you start to become, again, going back into that more objective lens, you start to become more realistic about the world around you. You start to be a bit more aware of, again, intuition and red flags. Like, actually, I do need to listen to these things. So you become more intuitive. And actually, because you've often had to soothe yourself, you can be somebody, you know, I'm certainly in this category, that doesn't always need validation or comfort from other people. So you learn to self-soothe. And that can be a very lonely path. So you don't want to be only there. It's about, again, going to the individual and then the collective. Is to learn how to self-soothe, how to problem solve, how to be objective, but then to blend into the collective again and not be isolated within that.
That kind of sounds like wisdom to me.
Well, yes. Funnily enough, I wrote a book called Wounded Warrior Wisdom. Right. Because the idea is that you do need to go into that self at first. And often most people are forced into that if they've gone through quite a lot of stress and trauma early on. But then it's about, how do we reconnect? Because if you stay disconnected and you're only ever self-soothing, that can be a very isolating experience. And, you know, to add to that, you know, you find that with a lot of CEOs and business owners, is that they do feel quite isolated because they haven't done the next step of reconnection. So it's important.
That story kind of reminded me, well, the way you just said that kind of reminded me about my grandma a lot, because I remember this one situation. I can't actually remember what I'd done, but I'd done something wrong, and my mum was just blaring at me. She's a Scouser, so she was very angry at me. And I remember my grandma just saying, like, Carol, just have a minute. And then she took me, and then she was talking to me, and when I look back on it when I was much older, she was basically understanding why I'd done it rather than what I'd done or, you know, like how bad it was. She just took me out of that environment, and she was I just remember being so calm, and that's exactly what it was. It was like she didn't let her emotions get the best of it, like of the situation, didn't let the incident get the best of the situation. She kind of extracted herself and was very wise about, like, you know, something's happened here, and it was something had gone wrong in my day at school, and I was really upset, and that's why I'd been a little dickhead or whatever. And so that kind of resonates with me quite a lot.
So with repetition compulsion, very psychodynamic view of things, which is that we keep repeating the same cycles, whether it be in dating or in any other situation, but predominantly in our relationships, because what we're trying to do is resolve the issue that was originally the cause of the trauma or the pain. We don't know this. This is largely unconscious. This is where therapy helps to make the unconscious conscious, so you start to become aware of what you're doing. So a good therapist will look at, what's the relationship like? What are the dynamics in the relationship? What's your behaviours in the relationship? What's their behaviours in the relationship? And if they've done due diligence and they've looked at your childhood, which you have to do, then you can see where the mirrors are. So for someone and again, I will say, someone always says who they are in the beginning. They show you exactly who they are, your idea of who you want them to be. So you're idealizing them and you're sort of projecting the perfect image onto them because you want to resolve the problem that's within you.
Right. Okay.
Most people, when they get into a relationship, obviously not all, but most people are looking to resolve something in themselves. They've idealized and fantasized the partner, and then what happens is that partner isn't who they thought they were going to be. And suddenly it comes to, you've made me feel like this, you've hurt me. And I always say, someone can only trigger a wound that already exists. So in relationships, in dating, if you're hurt, it is your responsibility as an adult to understand what's hurting and why, and not blame the other person. It could well be that the other person is not the right person for you, and you have every right to put boundaries in place or end that relationship. If you feel like, no, but I don't want to end it, I just want to make it work, then you're anxiously attached.
Right.
So the idea is that you're looking at your wound. You're going, well, this person shouted at me. Instead of saying that you shouted at me, you made me feel it's your fault. We have to zoom out. Remember I said about the broad perspective, and we have to look at all the ingredients. In our own subjective lens, we can only ever see it through a blinkered view. The job is, and I do this one exercise with people, which is I say, imagine that your argument is on a cinema screen. You're the watcher in the first row, and the watcher's job is to analyse what's on the screen. What are you thinking as you look at that situation on the cinema screen? Then we zoom back to awareness. Now awareness is only looking at the watcher. So awareness is now really observing the analysis of the watcher. Then we go to witness. Witness is now paying attention to awareness. Are you with me so far?
Yeah, I'm with you.
So witness is sort of like, okay, collating all that information. Witness talks to the projector.
Right.
And says, right, we've got all this information and we want to change what's on the screen. So we want to look at the screen differently. And then we go back through the loop again. Now we've changed, could be that we've chosen a different sentence, or we've left the room earlier and taken some time out, whatever would be appropriate behaviour in that situation. Then we go through the watcher, awareness, witness again, and we go round in that loop until we've got what feels like a very balanced response in the body. And once the body goes, oh, actually, yeah, that feels about right, then we can start going, okay, so in future, when you're in this situation with your dating or with your partner, we now know that when you do ABC, your body actually feels much more settled. So when it comes to relationships, the onus is on us to make sure we understand ourselves, that we know how to communicate that, we know what our boundaries are, and we know how to pick the right people in the first place, rather than going through that repetition.
You're going to go around the circle all the time.
Yeah.
So how does self-sabotage play a part in this? Like why do people self-sabotage?
Again,
you did mention it briefly, but...
Yeah, it really goes to that familiarity. So repetition is recognition. If throughout your life you were punished a certain way or treated a certain way, what happens is we tend to repeat those cycles later on. on. And you've got two ways of looking at this. So with certain abuse and neglect and difficult experiences, bullying, that kind of thing, we either become the externalizer of the aggressor, so we take it out on the people around us, or we internalize the aggressor and we become the inner bully, or we become abusive to ourselves. And so if we expect, for example, that someone's going to abandon us, we might sabotage the relationship and we will make it so that we leave them first. So what we're doing is we're learning that actually it feels better to walk away now and sabotage that, so self-sabotage, than it is to be abandoned. There's an example.
Then the pain goes up the longer it goes on. That's so interesting. In terms of men and women, it's never been worse than it is right now. Why do you think that it is fundamentally that way, where men and women are very hard to get on with, together building a relationship is harder than ever? Why do you think that is? Again,
we touched on this with schools. I think one of the things is that the world has become a lot more full of choice. So, we see a lot more toxic behaviours as a result of that. Men are generally biologically driven to continually procreate. That's kind of like the fundamental. I'm not saying that's okay now, because we live in 2026, not, 1,000 years ago. But there's a biological drive in younger men to want to procreate often. And also, I think we've seen over the last maybe 40 years the way society's changed. So the parenting handed down to the children, we've seen that marriages have broken up. We've lost, you don't have to be religious, as in you don't have to be a Christian or a Catholic or anything, but we've lost a lot of the moral compass over the last 40 years. So where we lose the stability in society, we see that parenting changes. Now, don't forget, my parents were in wars. So their stress, their PTSD meant that the way that they parented wasn't ideal. So that keeps getting handed down through generations. And then we've got the likes of people like Andrew Tate and disruptive marketers that see using disruptive marketing as a way of earning lots of money. So they are very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know what the word is, because...
Sort of like hyper-masculine.
Yeah, and because it gets likes and views. And some of it, look, I'll be honest, some of what he says makes sense, but the vast majority of it, when you're talking to impressionable, underdeveloped brains, is dangerous.
They take it too extremely, don't they?
Yeah, because again, it's not nuanced and it's not balanced. So if it's unbalanced, then the young men will only have that lens to look through. If you're not getting a balanced lens, now again, this is where it comes to parenting and systems. We need much more of that supportiveness to enable that masculine feminine to be more balanced. But they're getting all of their information through the teachers such as Andrew Tate, which is wrong. So that's where I think we're seeing more and more breakdown. So we've seen the breakdown of marriage and moral compass over the years, and then we've got all of this information with these people that are using disruptive marketing to target young people who then carry on exhibiting that very toxic hypermasculine behaviour. Girls as well, they're seeing people like Bonnie Blue and prior to that, other kind of access to types of women, be it Katie Price at that, when I was, she's the same age as me, making lots and lots of money. So the body becomes the commodity, and the more money the woman makes, the less she wants or needs the man. I don't need a man kind of thing. So that relationship changes, the dynamics change. So it's a mix of ingredients. It's a very holistic thing. Life is holistic, and we have to look at all the different areas to understand. Now, how you solve that problem, it goes back to community, it goes back to systems, it goes back to parenting, it goes back to home, it goes back to community. And so we've really got to go back, because at the minute, if we keep going the rate we're going with technology, I mean, AI, you can have an AI girlfriend or an AI boyfriend, and it's going to get worse. And that on its own isn't a problem if all of the other fundamentals are in place. And that's the issue with relationships. And this is what I was saying to you earlier. These kids that are growing up on devices now, you watch what happens in 40 years. We'll stop procreating.
Yeah, they're going to be ruined.
Yeah.
They're not going to know how to navigate the dating world, or even just to be with the opposite sex.
It's true, because back in the day at the school disco, this is what would happen. The boy would go up to the girl. He wouldn't have all the other girls from all the other schools on his phone, you see. So he might know only like the girl in his school, and he'd have the ideal girl in his school. He'd go up to her at the disco, he'd ask her for a dance, she'd say no, he'd get rejected, he'd have to deal with that rejection in real time, be a bit humiliating, but he'd build up the tools and the resilience for it. Whereas now he can message 30 girls at once that he's never even seen in his life before and ask them out and send nude pictures of himself, and the girls are doing the same back. They're like 12, 13, 14 years old. You know, when my daughter she's 18, I said she used to go to, she didn't actually go to the party, she wasn't allowed, but on Snapchat she'd see all the pictures, and it'd be some girl, honestly, 13 years old, giving a boy a blowjob, and someone's filming it. And that's happening 5 years ago. So these things actually are happening. This is not like, shock value.
This could happen.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it's happening, and it's going to get worse.
I remember seeing a stat on, it was a Snapchat, and it said that the average 14-year-old has sent a nude.
Yeah.
Like a female. The average 14-year-old female. And it'd only be worse for men as well. And it's sent a nude. And I could not comprehend that. I thought, like, I'm not a father, but I thought, as a father, there could be nothing worse than, like, you know, a nude going around of your daughter who's 14 years old. Like,
why do you think I said that the kids should not have phones until they're 16?
No, I completely agree. Like, my kid is going to have one of them brick phones.
Yes.
Where, hello, goodbye, text message, probably £1 on it at a time for credit.
And I actually think you're right, because I think by the time you have a child, whether that's next year or whenever, what will happen is more people will start thinking that way.
Yeah.
Because the girl that does my lashes, actually, she's 24. We had this conversation the other day, and she's obviously much younger than me. And she said, I'm not giving my kids devices. I think those kids now see their friends and the way it's affected them and their friends. And they're like, I actually am not going to do that.
We need to peel it back.
So we're going to see 50-50 probably.
Yeah, hopefully. And then the last one, this is a very dividing question. Like, I've seen it on Reddit the other day about breakups, like how bad breakups can be. Some people seem to breeze through them. Some people it's like the world's ending. So how traumatic are breakups, or how traumatic can breakups be?
The breakup is as traumatic as the wound that's unhealed. So the breakup itself is upsetting, and obviously you're going to grieve and go through that, but the trauma is attached to the wound that already exists. Right. So sometimes that wound can be a lack of resilience. If you haven't had to go through anything and you've had the perfect life and you've been the princess or the prince, and you've never had to deal with someone rejecting you, you've never had to deal with someone saying no, that can be very traumatic the first time someone leaves you. Or if you are somebody that has been through abuse, neglect and bullying, and the wound hasn't been seen to, and you've relied on your partner to be the person that looks after you and takes care of your every need, and they go, suddenly, your trauma is reactivated. So the breakup is as traumatic as the wound is unhealed.
That makes a lot of sense. We always round up the podcast with 4 of our last questions, and they're quite quick fire. You ready?
Yeah.
So what's the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh my God, you said quick fire. I can't think of any bad advice now. I think really just, I hate it's okay not to be okay. And it's not a bit of advice, but it's a saying that we hear. It's actually not okay not to be okay. You're okay to feel bad, but I think that limits us very much. Oh, it's okay not to feel okay. Okay, I'll just stay here then. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, there's no solution.
There's no solution. So actually, if we're going to say it's okay not to be okay, we then have to go, however, we need to move through that, not let's, just stay there.
There's a book needed at the end.
Yes.
No, I agree with that. I've always agreed with that, saying it's okay to not to be okay. But then, like you said, there's the caveat of, well, now we need to do this to be okay. Yeah. I fully agree with that. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Best piece of, I think it is about the domino effect. Is to not try and get it right first time, is to take one small step at a time. And I think those sorts of things really helped me when I was in real need of support. I didn't have any. So again, going back to the 3,000 steps a day that I mentioned earlier, for me, one of the first things I did to get myself out of a terrible situation was walk. And so that first step will lead to the next. You don't need to know what the next step is.
Yeah. 100% agree. What are the things you value most in life?
I think I value most health. So a healthy mind and a healthy body, because without that, you've got nothing.
And then to you, what's the meaning of life?
I think it is about paying it forward. So whatever you go through, whatever happens in your life, if you can learn how to pay that forward so it can be powerful for somebody else, then in a way, you can make everything worth it.
I understand. And where can people find you, and what's for you next?
Probably the biggest platform is Instagram for me, which is at Ella McCrystal. I've just launched my supplement brand. Neuroelectrics method, which is my method which I use with my clients, is being launched this year. I've got my second book coming out this year, which is Letters to Myself, and an app which is called Self, which is coming out at the same time the training academy is launched. So there's going to be lots of people that are going to be able to use the method, whether it be as a service user using the app, or whether it's as a clinician teaching other people and their own clients how to use the method. And of course, the book will come out for people that don't want to do either of those things, but they would like to read something that helps them to be able to work through their own emotions.
Sounds brilliant. It's always interesting talking to psychologists, because it's very hard to track things. Like, I feel like with biology it's quite easy to track and quite easy to keep up, as you know, as hard as it gets sometimes. But with psychology it's very subjective, and that's one thing that's always, you know, like kind of lured me into psychology more and more as I've grown older, because I've kind of understood that, you know, you need to try and find the answer. You can't always find the answer, but you know, the endeavour to try and find the answer and find
it's working with people that are flexible and fluid, so that you're not expected to fit into their way of doing things. Because I think any method, be it, you know, exercise or psychology, that asks you to fit into somebody else's method, it's not taking into account your genetics and your state of mind at the time. So flexibility is key, and with psychology you can track it. This is what the method does. You know, people actually do start, because the journaling's such a big part of it with the program. They actually see where they started and where they end. And because these methods are based on neuroplasticity, not just on how do you feel today, you can see long-term impact. You can see how the brain's rewiring itself, and you can feel that in yourself. So psychology can be more data-driven. It's just that it's not there yet.
Yeah. Really appreciate all your work, and I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much,
for having
Ella.
me. Thank you.